All right. So Laurie, we're going to start with this one first. Can you talk a little more about the upper and lower bounds of acceptance criteria, how they are established and justified?
Sure. This is this is again probably another topic for a webinar all in and of itself. But this is how we approach it. Again, from our perspective, this is how we approach it. Is that in the state-of-the-art section, we've established we've told the story of the state-of-the-art and gotten down to the part where we're talking about the maturity of technology, where we begin in that part of the state-of-the-art story to introduce the subject devices technology and start to compare it again, or to compare it or to establish that there are other devices with similar technology, and this technology does X, Y, and Z for the patient or the indication or the treatment as a treatment option. And then as we've established some of the competitors that have similar indications and technology as our subject device, then we move kind of clearly then into presenting in a subsection how we searched the competitor device using a competitor device name X and then Y and Z. And then we go through that same methodology, pulling out, and then our reviewers will look at the systematic literature review results of the competitive device search, go through the same process of exclusion. And then at some point, we will have some number of articles on competitor devices that have data in them that we can extract as data in them on the safety and performance objectives of our device. Let's just say I'm going to use a cardiac stent, for example, that some of the safety and performance objectives might be rates of MACE events, stent restenosis rate, death at rates of cardiac death at 6 months or 1 year. These are very specific safety and performance objectives, and whatever those are for our subject device, we're going to be looking for results in the competitors of those same safety and performance objectives. And maybe there are 25 competitor articles, maybe more even, where we can extract the data from many different clinical trials or retrospective or prospective studies that are published out in clinical literature. And that really begins to then populate a table. And then what we use then are the lower bounds that we see, the lower rates for a particular objective is use minimally acceptable rate for the subject device's performance objectives, and an upper bound of those safety and performance is considered the minimally accepted rate for safety objectives. And we justify that logically in our this question is, how are they established and justified? You need to write language around why that is a justifiable approach. And that's really all I can say about that. You have to justify it, so you have to tell that story about why that is a justifiable methodological approach to establish upper and lower state bounds. So I hope that helps. This is where writing comes in, and where telling a clear story and being very unambiguous about that is very clear. Now, if I'll finish the answer by saying this: if your notified body takes exception to your justification, they may ask you to provide additional justification, and you'll have to put that in a regulatory response after the fact. But they may want more justification. But that's okay. You just have to justify it as best you can, and then hope the notified body accepts that or asks you a very specific question to give more information. Next question.
All right, Laurie. Next question is, can you expand further on presenting the impact justification for similar equivalence characteristics, especially the technical justification?
This is another, that's a great question. And we don't often get a lot of equivalence questions. It all boils down to whether it's the clinical, technical, or biological characteristics that you're justifying, it all comes down to the one question. What is the clinical impact? Because this is a clinical evaluation report. So the notified bodies want you to explain, does this technical difference between subject device A and subject device B ultimately result in a clinical impact to your patient? And that could be a clinical impact to the patient themselves, like directly to the patient, or a secondary clinical impact to your patient because there may be confusion on the part of the user, or any kind of differences with blood contacting materials. You might have to go into some research and some justification around that. But you think about the clinical impact of the patient, it isn't just about that the patient feels the impact, but there may be results due to confusion of the user, or the usage of the device, or the patient contact materials that are that would need to be further justified. As long as you conclude with that these differences are minor and due to this justification that you've just written, and present no clinical impact to the safety, to the patient. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that logical leap and that justification.
All right, Laurie, here's the next question. What's the best practice for establishing S&P objectives?
So that's a great question too, and it's one that we engage pretty collaboratively with our clients. Again, I would say that we are a medical writing team. We certainly have opinions about safety and performance objectives, and we consider ourselves a subject matter expert on the CER and what is best presented in the CER and how it's presented and how the whole document flows. We are not a subject matter expert, obviously, on your own device. You know that deeply, but we often collaborate in this area with our clients, saying, well, this is very important about our subject device. Okay, and we have many clinical trials that show this. Well, all right, then let's go back to the clinical trial. How did you present the data in your clinical study report, for example? What is written there? And using those, the best practice for establishing them is to look first internally. How do you establish the safety and performance? How do you justify it within your own company or to external, across your document? And then whatever those are, they need to be quantifiable. You need to say, like I just said, the rate of death of a stent as a safety or a performance, likely a safety requirement. But the rate of death when? At 6 months, at 30 days, at 1 year, and how is death defined? Because a patient with your stent in it, in them, could die of a car accident. That's death, but it's not. So this gets a little bit into causality. It doesn't relate to your subject device. So be thinking about those kinds of questions as you're establishing the specifics of each safety and performance objective. State the safety and performance objective, and state as evidenced by, rate of cardiac death at 60 days after stent implantation. And if that's common throughout within your therapeutic area, and other stent manufacturers would report on that same type of performance objective or safety objective, then that means we'll be able to find it and their rates in the clinical literature. So I hope that helps.
All right, Laurie, the next question is, when conducting literature searching, is it acceptable in the industry to limit your literature set to English language results only?
We've been at this MDR and CER thing since 2016, and that was a hot topic for a few years. We have found in our experience in the last 2 or 3 years that there's been no pushback whatsoever from from a notified body of any of our clients that we set it to English language only. There doesn't seem to be any expectation that a manufacturer would go through the trouble of translating an article in the off chance that it may have additional information. Now, I would only say one thing. One caveat to that is, if you have a paucity of data on your clinical data on your device, and you know that there are some articles out there written in a foreign language that do have data that's applicable to your device that you know of, then that might be well worth you to go through the trouble and expense of having that article translated.
All right, Laurie, the next question related is, what should the time range for conducting a literature search be? 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? And secondly, what could be the maximum gap between the last date of literature search time range and the submission date to the notified body?
Those are really great questions. We have found that the answer to the first question, what's the time range for conducting a literature search? For us, if it's like an initial, let's just say in a de novo CER world, in other words, there's no predecessor CER. This is a brand new experience and a brand new initial submission of an MDR CER. We have found a 5-year search is usually very acceptable. 10 years, if you think that that's useful, and that there might be some critical information, like, to kind of justify your device going back farther than 5 years, that is fine. The notified bodies don't seem to push a lot at that. Nothing less than 5. I can tell you, in our experience, it's never been less than 5 for an initial CER or an initial search, not annual updates. Because then, obviously, I just want to say quickly that in an annual update CER, really, if you keep all of your same systematic literature review criteria and search terms, then all you're doing is a gap search from last year's closing date to this year. So that's been our experience. I would say that the other part is, what is the maximum gap between the last day of literature search time range, submission date of the notified body? This is somebody who really is asking a very specific question, which is great, because we get into this with our clients. In our experience, we find 3 months has been acceptable, because I think, and I can't, again, we do not directly interface with the notified bodies. We see many of their reports that come back, and certainly their questions, but we're not obviously auditing or in a room in any way with them. But it does seem that 3 months seems to be justifiable to them, because I think they recognize that systematic literature reviews need to happen pretty early in the overall cadence of writing a CER, and that a CER takes a solid 10, 12 weeks, and sometimes much longer to write. So that 3 months has been our experience. But again, if I want to finish by one thing, if for some reason within the writing time of your CER that something gets delayed, and you've written that CER halfway, but something internally, regulatory, something's happening, and that the date of submission of the CER may have just gotten pushed out 3 more months, it's very acceptable to, you don't need to start from scratch, just do a quick little gap search, that goes back, 2 or 3 months to catch up from your previous SLR search.
All right.
Okay.
There's about 5 minutes left. We have lots of questions to get through, so we will get to as many as we can. And then, as we said, we'll follow up with those of you who we couldn't answer questions for directly in the webinar. So the next one, Laurie, is when you talk about the competitor landscape data, is it then all data that you find through the state-of-the-art literature search, or do you make specific searches for selected competitor devices?
The easy answer to that is it's a specific search for selected competitor devices. So this question gets to an important point too. To support the state-of-the-art section, that to us is two searches. One is more of a PICO search for state-of-the-art literature, where we're looking at patient and indication, and we're looking for guidelines and references and background information. Think of it that way. It doesn't have that search doesn't need to be screened. The MDR doesn't require that you screen that search, but looking for background information to tell the story is the easiest way to say that. But when it comes to now that you're going to extract data on the competitor devices, that must be a separate search and very treated just as methodologically robust as you would as you're extracting data on your own device in the clinical data sources for your own device. So that's how we approach it. Two separate searches, one handled differently than the competitor device.
All right, the next question. What if there's no device-specific literature on competitive devices?
I'm going to take that to mean, and we have written CERs like this, they're challenging, I would say, is that we've written some CERs for clients who really have breakthrough technology, and they have really no competitor per se. That takes a lot, I will be honest, that takes a lot of collaboration, because between us as writers and the strategists of telling the story in the CER, and then understanding what more about your device. And we might go into discussions about, well, what is the technology that your device uses, and what does it bring to the table, and what is its benchmark technology? In other words, unless it's a completely new and it has there's really nothing new under the sun. All ideas come from something else. So we may have to go back to where did this idea come from, and what is that technology used for, and how does that work? It is so you may not have a direct competitor to your device, but your device may employ technology or systems or an approach that is not unique. And there are other competitors that do the same thing, but don't kind of pull it together in the way your device does. It is a tricky argument. I will say that, and it requires a lot of collaboration, but it's possible to do it.
All right, Laurie, we're getting down to the end. How detailed should be the description of the state of the art?
Well, that all depends on, it should be detailed. Let me put it that way. That's a kind of an open-ended question. I would say that it should be detailed. It should be clear. All indications and all patient populations of every device must be covered. So for example, if you have some device that has 5 different, I'll just say some sort of an ablation, cardiac ablation device that is used to treat, I'm just gonna use some acronyms now, SVT, PSVT, atrial fib, paroxysmal atrial fib, chronic atrial fib. I mean, so I just named off 4 or 5 different indications. Each one of those indications must go through, its background, its epidemiology, the whole story. Sometimes these state-of-the-art sections, it is not uncommon for us to write 30-page state-of-the-art sections. Not uncommon at all, because if it's got that many indications, each one of those is its own parallel story until you get sort of towards the end where you're talking about competitor devices. So it's detailed. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you so much, Laurie, and all our attendees for joining us today. If you're interested in learning more about the content we discussed, would like to take advantage of our free consult offer for joining us today, you can reach out to us at the email consult@criterion.com. You see that on your screen there. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful and safe day and week. Thank you again.